All right. Hello, good morning or afternoon, everybody, depending on which time zone you're in. Welcome and thank you for joining Network Partners for this Brunch and Learn web event, What State of the Art Really Means, an inside look at CERs. A few quick housekeeping items to address. That was my computer. Please mute yourselves once you've joined if there's an option to mute. If not, you've been auto-muted. A colleague is going to actively patrol participants just to manually make sure that people are muted as needed. We ask that you address all your questions through the Q&A feature of the platform. And lastly, this webinar is recorded and you will receive the recorded presentation as well as the PDF version of the PowerPoint. So without further ado, Network Partners' Director of Medical Writing, Angela Siebeneck.
Thank you, Renee. Welcome to our WebEx on state of the art, on what state of the art really means, an inside look at clinical evaluation reports. As Renee said, I'm Angela Siebeneck and I'm the Director of Medical Writing for Network Partners. I am a registered nurse and have worked since 1994. I have worked in interventional radiology, surgical intensive care, trauma, vascular access, post-operative care, and currently work as needed in home care and hospice. I began working in the medical device industry in 2013 in marketing, and by 2015, regulatory and clinical claimed me as their own. Not too long after that, in 2016, MedDev 2.7/1 Rev 4 was released. What was once an afterthought, the clinical evaluation report, came into the spotlight. To give you an idea of the impact this had, the year prior to the MedDev being released, I completed about 9 CERs, which were 60 to 130 pages each. The following year, I needed a team, as we completed 23 CERs, which grew to 100 to 250 pages each. With all the changes, one that is frequently overlooked is state of the art. So today, I will start with a high-level overview of what a clinical evaluation report is by briefly reviewing the clinical evaluation process and report. I will help you understand what is needed for state of the art and why it's important. And finally, I will walk you through state of the art for a specific device. To create the CEP and CER, a clinical review needs to be performed of the clinical literature, preclinical, and clinical data. The clinical evaluation will review the post-market surveillance data, including complaints, CAPAs, recalls, searches of the MAUDE database, UTAMED, when it finally comes out, as well as any foreign databases where the products are sold. Those results are compared to those found in the risk assessment, and any risks not mitigated will need to be addressed in your post-market clinical follow-up. Information from the technical file will be reviewed, including the IFU, labeling, and preclinical testing, to name a few. The CER will then feed back to potential changes required in those areas, including the risk assessment, and the clinical literature obtained should feed into the PMS system. Additionally, any gaps noted may lead to updates needed in your technical file. Prior to beginning the clinical evaluation report, you need a clinical evaluation plan. This is a relatively new expectation from our notified bodies, but the contents of the plan are clearly outlined in Annex 14 of the MDR. The contents of the CEP will have some overlap with the CER, and these will include the description of the device, the design indication and population considerations, risks to be addressed, PMS data to be included, current knowledge of state of the art in the field, including databases that will be searched, search criteria, inclusion of standards, guidance documents, clinical practice statements, as well as your inclusion, exclusion criteria, awaiting criteria, and it will state if the clinical evaluation will be based on clinical data or on equivalence. MedDev 2.7/1 Rev 4 states, a clinical evaluation is required by the notified body for the EU as part of the technical file. Its purpose is to collect, appraise, and analyze clinical data. It now applies to all classes of devices, including Class 1. It needs to review the safety and performance and weigh the risks and benefits of the device, including the nature, probability, extent, duration, and frequency of those risks. Appendix 9 of the MedDev lists a sample table of contents for your CER. The CER should start with an executive summary, followed by the scope, the state of the art, description of the device under evaluation, clinical data held by the manufacturer, clinical data from the literature, summary of appraisal of the clinical data, analysis of the clinical data, and conclusions. I highly recommend following this format so that if or when you're audited by your notified body, they're able to quickly find the information they're looking for. I don't need to tell you how frustrating it is when you have an audit and the questions asked are in your document, but the notified body can't easily find them. Today, I will primarily be discussing Section 3 of the CER, which is clinical background and state of the art. State of the art was mentioned 4 times in MedDev 2.7/1 Rev 3, 39 times in MedDev 2.7/1 Rev 4, and 9 times in the MDR. With the increased scrutiny on clinical evaluation reports, additional emphasis has been placed on establishing state of the art. MedDev 2.7/1 Rev 4 states, state of the art is the current standard of care or best practice for the medical condition or treatment for which the device is used. So what does this mean? You need to establish you are the same, or at least not any worse, than the other treatment options. I refer to this as keeping up with your neighbors. So what is state of the art? It establishes the landscape and ground to support the relevance of the device as a treatment option for the condition treated. In other words, why your product? Why this treatment? And why not another? It establishes the safety and performance of similar devices and alternative treatment options as a comparison to your device. And it includes literature found not only on the subject device or the equivalent of a device and similar devices, but also on alternative treatment options. There are varying opinions on what state of the art should include, but if you look in the sample table of contents in MedDev Rev 4, Appendix 9 will guide you to what should be in this section. Historical knowledge, such as what happened before this device came to be and how it's evolved. It should also address the relevant medical fields and conditions. It needs to include similar devices made by the same or different manufacturers. It should describe alternative therapies to using this device, which may include no treatment or pharmaceutical treatment options. And finally, it will describe the risks and benefits of the similar devices and the alternative treatment options. I have been asked frequently if I need to do a separate literature search for state of the art. And the short answer is, I do, because it's different data. State of the art literature searching will often have different search states, different filters, and a broader inclusion-exclusion criteria than your clinical data search will. Your search will have broader terms, and in addition, it's going to include standards, guidance documents, and clinical practice documents. As part of the state-of-the-art, you need to include your search methodology. This should include search dates. I start with 10 years unless this is an update. If your device has been around for a long time, though, you may want to go back a little bit farther. You will also want to list the databases you search. We generally use Embase at a minimum, and sometimes we add PubMed. But certainly Google Scholar and Cochrane reviews can be valuable. You will want to define your search terms and filters. Additionally, state-of-the-art should include the searches for industry standards, professional organizations, government standards, and recommendations. And finally, you'll want to list your weighting criteria. One methodology for formatting a search is through the PICC method. This helps justify your search terms and ensures you're not missing an aspect of the device or its comparative devices. P is for your patient population or problem. So who are these patients and what's their problem? I for your intervention or exposure. What do you do to them? And what are they exposed to? C, comparisons. What do we compare the intervention with? And O, the outcome. What happens? What is the outcome? The information for your PICO should be found within your instructions for use, such as intended use, indications, patient populations, disease states, and potential complications. Once your search is complete and you have your articles and devices to include, you want to lead into state-of-the-art by reviewing the historical knowledge of the device. The historical knowledge section may include what happened before your device, specifics of the device, such as materials, design, configuration. You'll also want to discuss when the device was first introduced and how did it evolve. Next, you'll want to review why this device. What does it do and why is it beneficial? You should also include changes to the device that affect the clinical performance. This is not where you would put a labeling change unless it affects your device clinically. And finally, the user. Who places this device and what expertise is required? For example, in the case of a Band-Aid, that may be a layperson, but in the case of a bone plate, the user would be an orthopedic surgeon. The next area to cover to establish your state-of-the-art is the relevant medical conditions or diseases. In other words, what's the disease process, medical condition that calls for the use of your device? This should include anatomy in relation to the device. What would happen without your device? What are the consequences of the condition or disease? Are there different forms or severities of the disease or condition? And any epidemiological data pertaining to the disease for the population. How prevalent is this disease state? And are there sections of the population that it affects more? Once your conditions or diseases are clearly defined, you'll want to do an analysis of available alternative therapies. This will include other treatments available, and you will include your competitors' devices. And all must be supported by high quality evidence, cited and appraised for scientific validity. This is not the section where you call out how good you are and how bad your competitor is. You have to be fair and supportive. Each alternative therapy or device included will also need to include its benefits, warnings, risks, and complications. These will be compared to the benefits and risks of the subject device and help establish your state-of-the-art. This should be clearly laid out to show across the board which devices are the same or have differences in these areas. Now I will go through a quick overview of part of the state-of-the-art using a specific device. We'll go through a peripherally inserted central catheter, commonly known as a PICC. A PICC is inserted peripherally, generally in the basilic, cephalic, or brachial veins, through an introducer, and it is placed at the bedside or in interventional radiology. It has a stylet, if placed at bedside, which is removed after insertion. So to format your PICO search, I'll start with the indication. The indication for this device is short or long-term peripheral access to the central venous system for intravenous therapy, blood sampling, power injection of contrast media, and central venous pressure monitoring. The population this device is for is adults, and potential common complications may include infection or deep vein thrombosis. All of these will be used as my search terms. So formatting the search, P, adults needing central venous access or IV access. I for central venous access for infusion. C would include peripheral IVs, midline catheters, ports, or centrally inserted central catheters. And O, the PICC is indicated for short or long-term peripheral access to the central venous system for intravenous therapy, blood sampling, infusion, pressure injection of contrast media, and it allows for central venous pressure monitoring. You may also want to include potential complications here, as previously mentioned. This may include DVT and infection. Of course, there's additional complications, but these would be the common ones. We use the results of our searches to construct each section of the state-of-the-art. I start with the historical background of the device. In this case, we can go really far back if we want to the beginning of IV therapy. In this case, Sir Christopher Wren used a pig bladder to hold the infusant and a quill to infuse. I don't think we want to do that. Or you could just go back to the first PICCs or central lines. Another way to discuss the background is to create a timeline, or when the device was first created. This is a hypothetical timeline. In this case, we would describe the first manufactured PICCs in 2002. I think it actually was sooner than that, and that it was made from silicone. Next, we would discuss the next generation in 2004 with a proximal valve. In 2005, the device changed again, which would be mentioned and include its power injection capability of contrast media, and that expanded its indications. In 2007, the device material was changed from silicone to polyurethane, and in 2010, distal valves were added to the PICCs to allow for removal of clamps from the device. And finally, in 2015, a new material was developed to decrease potential complications. Next, you will review the anatomy and relevant conditions. In this case, a need for central access. Start by discussing the insertion sites. Here is the brachial, basilic, or cephalic veins, and the reason for choosing each vessel. Next, you'd want to explain how the PICC is inserted and how it will travel into the subclavian through the brachiocephalic vein and terminate in the distal superior vena cava. In this section, you would include a risk of deep vein thrombosis as well as the lack of risks of pneumothorax, for example. For the case of PICC, you would want to discuss bedside placement versus interventional radiology, and tip location verification methods, such as EKG or X-ray. This is also where the insertion technique and education required to insert and maintain the device should be discussed. This slide shows an overlap for you of the state-of-the-art and the safety and performance searches, or the clinical data searches. The S&P information for the subject and equivalent devices are in both, but state-of-the-art expands to similar devices, other manufacturers' devices, and other device treatment options. The next section would be a discussion of similar devices or competitor devices, and you'll also want to discuss other state-of-the-art devices. In this case, it may be older devices or devices that have slightly different characteristics. Finally, we would discuss the alternatives such as peripheral IVs, ports, midlines. Each of these devices, as well as the similar and state-of-the-art devices, need to go through their indications, their safety, and their performance. As we wrap up, I wanted to review a few best practices. First, have a search strategy and then ensure it's sound. And second, use multiple approved databases. Third, keep a record of all the literature returned so that you can show you're including all relevant articles and not just cherry picking those that make your device look good. Fourth, include your inclusion and exclusion criteria. And next, appraise and weight the data included. Summarize the literature. And finally, you have to include your full text of all the literature evaluated. Common mistakes that I've found include too narrow of a scope, an incomplete audit trail, using an ad hoc process because it can't be repeated. Your data integrity is questionable. For example, if you didn't have a good methodology for inclusion, exclusion, or you're missing weighting. And finally, your data isn't presented efficiently, and therefore it's really difficult to follow. And that concludes our presentation. My contact information is here, and please feel free to reach out. And I think we'll do some Q&A, Renee.
Yeah, so great presentation, Angela. Thank you so much for walking us through that. There's one question so far, and it is, when using PICO, is it okay to go out of order, or is there a specific methodology to follow?
So PICO is just going to help you derive your search terms, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific area, but it's going to ensure that you search all of those areas, if that makes sense. So no, you don't have to have a specific order, but yes, you want to include all of the sections.
All right. So that is the only question we have right now. I'll leave it open for another moment. And then if there are no other ones, I will go ahead and conclude this. Just want to give people another moment. All right, well, thank you everyone for your participation today during this Brunch and Learn. Again, you're going to receive this recorded presentation and the PDF of the PowerPoint. Make sure you stay in the loop and follow Network Partners on LinkedIn to access our updates and future webinars. Thank you again to everybody, and thank you again to Angela, and have a great rest of your Thursday. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.